Right, today we are joined by the one and only Inaya Folarin Iman, the founder of the Equiano Project, journalist and writer. And many of you will know her for her unapologetically honest takes on culture, on race, on free speech. And she has been a leading voice in challenging a lot of these dominant narratives that we see around identity politics and so on. Today, however, it is a great pleasure to be speaking to her today, and we will be taking on this term Islamophobia, a word that many accuse of being used to silence dissent or silence criticism and blur the lines between bigotry and valid critique of Islam. So we just wanted to get a bit of her thoughts on it today. First of all, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm really excited to be on the other side of the discussion for once with the Equiano Project. Usually I'm interviewing, but this is a rare occasion where I'm the subject of the discussion.
I'm sure a lot of our viewers will be so excited to hear from you as well. I'm sure they've seen you around on many other platforms, but it's really special that you definitely are on here today. So definitely find this valuable. But let's just go to this term Islamophobia, often framed as an irrational fear of Muslims, right, or Islam. And perhaps many concerns people do have, like terrorism, cultural clashes, human rights abuses, and so on. They are sometimes based on real world events. Could you just speak a little bit about this term Islamophobia as a whole? And does it oversimplify these legitimate concerns? And does it shut down important conversations?
Yeah, so the term Islamophobia has been around for a number of years, but it's really taken greater prominence in the public discussion. Following the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims, they sought to define Islamophobia fairly recently, and this was what they argued was, to some extent, a response to the definition of anti-Semitism. It was felt by some people that there needed to be a specific definition of bigotry, hatred, dehumanization of Muslims. And if you look at that APPG definition, it says Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. And it gives a whole host of examples. And some people, some institutions, like that many parts of the Labour Party adopted this definition, but it was always extremely controversial. And just to lay out some of the immediately obvious controversial issues, just by that definition alone, is Islam and phobia. Islam is a religion, and irrational fear, phobia. People are entitled to fear, strongly dislike, even hate particular ideas. That's completely different to fear of Muslims as individuals. So that's why some people prefer the term anti-Muslim hate or anti-Muslim bigotry, because Islamophobia actually essentially says that it is racist to have strongly held dislike of particular ideas. Many people would think that that is a complete the one of the basis of our democracy to be able to have a whole range of views when it comes to religious ideas. And, it conflates race with religion. Unlike Jews, where there's non-practicing Jews are also they can be ethnically Jewish. That's not the same as Islam, which is not an ethnicity. And another thing about it is this idea of targeting expressions of Muslimness. For many people, including myself, I think that's a very that's a big conflation. That's too wide. So take something like the burqa. Many people see that as an expression of Muslimness, but if you find that to be a garment that is oppressive against women, offensive, contravenes social cohesion, is that Islamophobic, or is that a critique of a religious garment that actually in many Muslim countries is extremely controversial? So up until quite recently, the burqa was banned in the Muslim majority country of Turkey, because it was viewed as oppressive against women. Or we see many Muslim women in Iran opposing the imposition of the veil on the basis that they think it's against their autonomy and freedom. So are the Iranian women, often Muslim women, protesting against imposed definitions of what it means to be a Muslim woman? Are they Islamophobic? And so we can already see, just by that simple definition, how this is really a slippery slope and very quite dangerous in critiquing just aspects of a religion that people might be against. There's a few examples that the APPG definition gives as examples of Islamophobia, which many people would find ridiculous. So, for example, saying that accusing Muslims as a group or Muslim majority states of exaggerating Islamophobia is an example of Islamophobia. Well, Iran, we know, constantly accuses the disagreements that many people have with the regime of being Islamophobic. So if I critique Iran and its practices and accuse of exaggerating Islamophobia, does that make me Islamophobic? That is absurd. Another example, it says, accusing Muslim citizens of being more loyal to the Ummah, which is the transnational Muslim community, or their countries of origin, than being loyal to the nation states that they come from. But I've spoken to many Muslims who do say that they think that the Ummah, the global Muslim community, is their primary identification. That's essentially saying Muslims themselves are Islamophobic, which obviously is ridiculous. And actually, we see when it comes to many of the protests in Palestine that in many areas of British society where there are a large proportion of Muslims, they have elected officials almost exclusively on the basis of the Gaza issue, which shows that they, in some senses, prioritize a foreign policy issue that they perceive of as affecting Muslims over issues to do with their local communities, such as housing, health, and so on and so forth. So just even a couple examples from that Islamophobia definition shows that it doesn't stack up to scrutiny. But there are plenty other examples. I would really recommend people just search APP definition of Islamophobia, and what it will really do is create a blasphemy law where you cannot criticize any aspect of Islam in the name of tackling racism.
That's so interesting. And, you mentioned the Jewish community. And what I've found is that, especially governments and media outlets, they often push this idea sometimes that they might not do it directly, but it's almost like Islamophobia is sort of one of the most pressing sort of hate crime or hate issue. Yet in the UK, we do find that Jewish communities, they experience significant amount of hate crimes against them. For instance, after the October 7th attacks, the UK witnessed a significant rise in religious hate crimes against the Jewish communities, right? According to some stats, we saw that anti-Semitic hate crimes more than doubled, increasing by 113%, right? And this was by the end of March 2024. In comparison, anti-Muslim hate crime also rose, but at a lower rate of 13%. So could you just tell us a little bit more about whether and why you think Islamophobia gets sort of a disproportionate attention compared to perhaps other forms of religious discrimination and hate crime?
I think that's a really good question. And I think I too have wondered that question. Actually, if you look at Jews as a proportion of the national population, we're talking about a very small percentage of the national population, but they make up, they're hugely overrepresented when it comes to victims of hate crimes. But in terms of the focus, we don't hear as much at all when it comes to what we need to be doing as a society to combat this vile, sickening hatred that has a long history in Europe in some of the most bloodiest and disgusting crimes against humanity that's taken place. And so there is a huge disproportionate focus on so-called Islamophobia, when actually anti-Semitism is a much bigger problem. And the reason I personally believe, there's many reasons, but I think one of the reasons is that when it comes to anti-Semitism, the perpetrators of anti-Semitism actually unfortunately, Muslims are disproportionate perpetrators of anti-Semitic hate crimes, and that for a lot of people is a very difficult thing to confront, and therefore it's much easier to talk about Islamophobia, because then you can easily start talking about the far right, and not necessarily have to deal with the problem of anti-Semitism within the Muslim community. And many Muslims have actually spoken up about this. There's a whole group that are friends of the Equiano Project called Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, and they've been very vocal that there is a deep-seated and widespread problem of anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish bigotry and hate that is, unfortunately, in some sectors of the Muslim community, is so normal that people don't even notice that they're doing it. Even someone that many people would be surprised to find out, several years ago, Mehdi Hassan, who's a prominent commentator in favor of Palestine, several years ago wrote an article talking about the dirty secret in the Muslim community is anti-Semitism. And so I think that's one of the reasons why that there isn't what I would argue is the balanced approach to tackling anti-Semitism versus Islamophobia. I also think that, sadly, when it comes to the Muslim community, there's a lot of, I would argue, gatekeepers who relish the discussion or the opportunity to talk about Islamophobia because they would like to silence discussion about Islam. There are some people who I think voices that are framed as spokespeople for the Muslim community that try to create a kind of victimhood narrative and a grievance narrative to bring in blasphemy laws by the back door. So it goes very much hand in hand, talking about how victimized and how much suffering you're experiencing, as a way to essentially normalize a taboo around the discussion. And we know this because there's a Labour MP, and again, this is something else that we should link to, that in the House of Commons just a few months ago said that, called on Keir Starmer to ban the so-called desecration of Abrahamic texts, i.e. ban the Quran and ban people that burn the Quran or do things that are perceived to be blasphemous, such as presenting images of the Prophet Muhammad and stuff like that. So I think that when it comes to Islamophobia, it suits a lot of people who want to silence criticism of Islam to exaggerate the problem of Islamophobia. But in terms of, your earlier question about people's legitimate concerns, and I definitely understand that. Look, nobody should be a victim of discrimination, hatred, dehumanization solely on the basis of being a member of a particular faith group. And regardless of what other things might have happened, that faith group has disproportionately been involved in, whether that's kind of Islamism or the grooming gang scandal. As the Equiano Project, we are people that believe that we should be treating people as individuals, and therefore we should always work to prevent the smearing of entire groups. But if we were going to have an honest conversation and want to genuinely deal with anti-Muslim bigotry, we'd want to understand the whole ranges of sources. Some of that comes from, I think, hatred that is irrational, but some of that, I think, comes from a genuine fear of practices and behaviours that people believe are at odds with things that they hold value and important, such as freedom and women's rights and other things like that. So unless we're going to have an honest conversation about these difficult topics, I worry that suspicion, resentment, and hatred between Muslims and non-Muslims may increase.
Right. And do you believe that that is the path to tackling genuine anti-Muslim hatred or bigotry?
I think it's got to be multi-pronged. So with us, one of the things that we try and do, one of the things that we're very good at is trying to create a space where people can talk about the most difficult and thorny issues, whether that's ethno-religious segregation, what's being spoken about in mosques and other places that a lot of people are very worried about, certain questions about integration, all sorts of things. And that's one of the paths. Another path, I think, and it has become a bit of a cliche, but it is true, we need Muslims that oppose this stuff to speak up. It's hard as an outsider from a community to have authority to talk about thorny issues within certain communities, because I can understand why that people can feel like get quite defensive and feel like they're just being attacked. We need people that understand the ins and outs of how certain religions and communities function and can be an authority to challenge harmful narratives, to speak up and to organize in a systematic way. But we also need wider society, that we're all part of, to actually take a stand. I mean, when you see the issue of the Batley Grammar School affair, where the teacher was forced into hiding for showing an example of what some people might find to be blasphemous in a religious studies class on blasphemy, institutions completely were terrified. Now, how can I think reformist and liberal Muslims feel confident speaking up when institutions that are there to even protect them are more afraid of offending hardliners within that community than actually standing up for basic liberal beliefs? So there, and the question of the law, like I think that there is a discussion we're having at the moment about two-tier justice and two-tier sentencing, and some of those sentencing guidelines, it wasn't just the race that which was got the most attention. It said religious minorities should be treated differently. Why? I mean, to me, that is extremely dangerous. Are we saying that if you are a Muslim man, and there are some within the Muslim community that believe that the Quran allows you to hit your wife as long as you don't leave a mark? Are we now saying that if a man does that and his wife reports him to the police, that because he's a religious minority, uh, maybe he shouldn't actually get a harsh sentence because that's just his deeply held beliefs? There's a huge there's so many areas where we're falling massively short in being able to protect basic rights of Muslims and non-Muslims.
Yeah, I think in the pursuit of equality under the law, I think it's very regressive that we're actually having this differential categories based on your ethnicity or your race. And I know you spoke about this recently because we shared this with our audience when you were on Moral Maze, about you mentioned the grooming gang scandal as well. And I always think of the Manchester bombing as well. And the inquiry found that the security guard in that situation, he was a bit reluctant. He felt that there was something off about the bomber, but he felt that he didn't want to be presumptuous because of the person's ethnicity. And I think that there is a danger to law enforcement and order when we start sort of second guessing ourselves on the grounds of someone's, ethnicity or their religion, or because we don't want to come across as bigoted or racist. So what would you say in terms of actual national security and social order when we actually don't treat people, fairly, or approach these kind of situations, with more sort of rationality?
Yeah, I think I recommend everyone listen to the Moral Maze episode. And what I was trying to get across is that undoubtedly we should be alert to racial or religious bias that we might have, but also there's a real risk in fear of being perceived of as racist and or religiously biased could actually have huge unintended consequences where you, as you rightfully mentioned, second guess yourself or don't step in because you're fearful of how you will be perceived. And that can be extremely dangerous. And we've seen that countless amount of times. There was a recent horrible murder case of a father and I think a stepmother of a young girl called Sara Sharif. And she didn't wear the hijab in her school. And all of a sudden, she started wearing it. Many of the teachers didn't want to query as to why she all of a sudden was wearing it. And it later transpired that the parents put that on her as a way of covering up her bruises that they were inflicting on her. Now, that is obviously an extreme and horrible and devastating example, but it provides an insight as to if we're all scared to ask questions, if we're all scared to trust our instinct when something might not be right, but our fear of and our fear of being perceived of as racist overtakes that, what harms are we hiding? What harms are we overlooking? What harms do we then become complicit in that we could have prevented? And I think that's really what we're seeing, and it worries it. And what angers me about it as well, there's so many things, but the left who position themselves as the kind of beacons against misogyny and homophobia and racism, they seem to almost completely have a double standard when it comes to these practices perpetuated by people that disproportionately come from a black or brown ethnicity. And then you don't genuinely oppose these issues. You actually think they're okay if they're perpetuated by certain people. And that's a really scary and dark thing to think, because it then makes you think, in the fight for true equality, who are one's real allies? Who are one's real champions?
And it's almost infantilizing because you're almost saying that they can't help it or we can't help it because it's our culture. Whereas perhaps if someone who is white or from a dominant group commits an act of violence or something that's contrary, then it's because of them. It's not, there's no sort of excuse given for that. And then you kind of remove that moral agency again, from us. And it's completely backwards, like you said. In the Sarah, just before, because I know we are going to have a very special event in a couple of weeks, but just before we dive into that, when you gave the Sara Sharif example, I do like that you mentioned that that was sort of an extreme case. And I know, yes, there might be legitimate concerns about certain practices in Islam, but we also can't generalize a whole group of people. So just talk about, I guess we'll, segue into the event we're going to have. Just talk about the aims of that event. What is your purpose? What do you hope for people to get out of that event? And where do you hope that leads us when we're sort of talking about, public discourse when it comes to faith in Islam?
Yeah, so we're holding an event on April 22nd, and it's about Islam, Muslims, and liberal democracies. And we've brought together an amazing roster of speakers, Muslims and non-Muslims. And we've flown Mustafa Akyol, who is a very fascinating and interesting Muslim thinker of Turkish origin, but based in the US. And the purpose of the event is we need to start talking to each other again. I think that there might be discussions taking place within Muslim communities that we're not aware of, but there's discussions taking place amongst non-Muslims, and I worry that because people aren't talking to one another, suspicion, fear, and stereotypes and caricatures are increasing. And if we are going to live together, and we are going to, because there isn't any turning back now, we can adapt the situation, we can perhaps improve it. But this is the society that we live in. We have to be able to speak openly about our fears, our worries, our hopes, and our dreams for the future of British society and our place within it. And there are a long list of challenges, and that don't even involve religion, but are issues across the board, whether that's to do with national identity, whether that's to do with opportunities for a newer generation. And I think that what we want to do is to say that we are the place, we can be the place where you can get things wrong, you can make mistakes in what you say, you can have said something that you've not fully thought through, but experiment with ideas, and you can do that in, ironically, a safe space, because that's literally what we need. And I think we're really at crisis point actually in British society. I really think that, and I've never been an alarmist. I've always tried to be someone that's really balanced, but I really think that we're almost at the point of no return with the level of, migration that we've had, but in tandem having the attacks on kind of British identity and the undermining of kind of a shared national story, I think we're really at risk of fragmenting to something extremely dangerous and extremely dark. And we had riots last year, but I actually think that many of the issues that the riots um, brought up have been remained unresolved, and that's questions to do with fairness, questions to do with belonging, questions to do with equality. All of these kinds of things have remained unresolved, and I think it really gives us insight as to where things could go if we don't address them. Now, we can't do everything, but what we can try and do our part to say that we're a space where we will have honest conversations. We will bring people that disagree with each other together, and they will talk to each other, and they will do it in a civilized way. And hopefully, we will bring more light than heat to the conversation. So I really hope you can attend. We want as many people to attend as possible. I think it's going to be a really exciting, interesting, fascinating, and perhaps a very rare conversation. I don't think people get the chance to do this very, very often. So that's why we're doing it, and I really hope that you can attend.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It was fascinating chatting to you as always. And I would just say to our listeners, if today's conversation definitely sparked something in you and you want more, you want sort of to dive deeper into these issues that we've discussed and even more, right? Beyond the headlines, beyond the fear, beyond the cliches, then this is definitely an event that we encourage you to attend. The tickets and all the other details, ticket links will be in the description on Eventbrite. They add some discounts as well, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And come with your questions and definitely be part of this conversation that really matters. So thank you.